Thanks for the great introduction. So I threw away my presentation last night and started over. So the reason being is because getting very inspired by the presentations that were given yesterday, and also talking to more of you and trying to get an understanding of what I could be speaking of that would be different and interesting. So the two things that I'm speaking about today are about people and also design. So a lot of my work has been in the design industry. As mentioned, I have been a researcher most of my career. So I started out doing design, and then I went into more of design research, and I'll go into more detail on that later. But the type of research that I do is more sociologic or ethnographic or psychological, and understanding what somebody's motivations, what their needs are, how do they fit within a societal construct, what are they concerned about, and then developing something that is meaningful for them. And so the work that I've done in the past for that then has been applied to this new area. Now, although I'm going to be speaking about design later, you're not going to see the design until the very end, because I think it's most important to understand the rationale behind the design and understand why it's important, especially in terms of healthcare. So Clue is a company that I'm co-founder of, and I'm in charge of the product. So I do everything. So every pixel that you see, every interaction that you see is something that I'm responsible for, making sure that it gets right. The people who use Clue are tracking a monthly cycle, the fertility cycle. And so it's sometimes gets described as a period tracker. We go quite far beyond that. And it helps people understand what's happening throughout their cycle and giving them insights about their cycle. So in terms of design research, the approach that we take, the approach that I developed, was to take an extremely broad view. Normally, what happens with design research is, from a business strategy perspective, is you define your target segment. So you try to make your addressable segment as small as possible so that you can be as effective as possible with that very small segment. We took a very different approach where we went broad as possible, because there are 51% of the people on the planet are women, and we wanted to reach out to as many of them as possible. So that meant age range, so everything from first period to last period. That meant all different countries, different socioeconomic backgrounds, and really understanding then and developing a very deep understanding of what's going on with that breadth of people, and then designing a service for them. We tend, as was mentioned yesterday, in this type of approach, to favor the outliers. So once we have a broad understanding of all the issues, then we identify these people that are representative of the moving targets. So who are the, which segment is the leader segment? Which people are the leader people? And then we dive more deeply into their behaviors, their needs, the context that surrounds them. And then being in a product company, we hold the question open all the time. So what is the best service that we can continue developing? And we hold those questions open, and we never let them down. So one of the ongoing forms of research that we do, I've now spoken to in-person interviews, a few hundred people. And then also then online, literally thousands of people when they contact us for support. So at the scale, it's a challenging endeavor at that level of research for one person to be handling all of that, and we just started to divide it up. But it's provided some really in-depth insights. So we're taking what is normally a qualitative type of research that I've done in very limited sets, and taking a more quantitative approach to that. So thousands of people doing qualitative research on thousands of people. And not stopping with the research, what I was just talking about. Qualitative research is kind of messy, so it's not the messy in the different type that happens in the lab. We're dealing with people. So it's messy in terms of introducing yourself to people in social situations, in different contexts. There's a formal way of doing research, and there's a casual way of doing the research. Just about everybody that I speak to asks at some point, what do you do? It turns into a question, it turns into an interview, basically. A very informal style of interview, don't be afraid. I'm not going to corner anybody into an uncomfortable conversation about their menstrual cycle, don't worry. But these are the types of places where I've actually done the research. This is Berlin. I live in Berlin. These literal places are some of the people I've spoke to her on that day about it, and I can't really see the person that I spoke to there about it. But one of the first times I presented at, about the topic, about the product that I'm working on, somebody asked a very provocative question, or I thought it was very provocative. What do women want? And I thought, well, if I felt very challenged by that. I felt challenged to come up with an answer. And then I started to unpack or understand what is the essence of that question. And it really came down to then, what is woman? And so now here is the exploration of that. So we started with, okay, if woman is on one side and men are on the other side, so that's one way you can split the matrix. And then you think, okay, well, there are different types of sexualities. So there's heterosexual, there's homosexual, and then there's different gender identities. So you could start now to get this 3D matrix going on. In reality, then you start plotting all these different people. They have different personality traits. And then they're all moving targets because they're getting older, they're introducing themselves into new social situations, all of this. What it really comes down to is that there is really no way to segment this group in a traditional way, which I think is great. So when we talk to answer the question of what do women want, what they really want is to not be treated like a segment. What they want is to not be treated like a woman. They want to be treated like themselves. So this segment of one approach is how we've taken and designed Clue around. And the question that it begs is, can you actually design a product for everybody and keep it emotionally engaging? And the answer is yes, because the topics that we're dealing with are extremely emotional. So this level of radical inclusivity is part of our design strategy. The reason that this space is so emotional is because we're dealing with all these topics that go on, these symptoms that go on throughout an entire cycle. It happens every month, just about, for everybody who's in their fertile years. And they can be quite dramatic for some people. Some people actually have a hard time living their life through certain moments, that it recurs every month, and they seek medical intervention for these things. Women tend to have these questions about what's happening for them through their cycle, what's happening today. Is this thing that I'm experiencing today something that is recurring? And the only way that they can understand if that's recurring is if they start tracking it. So these are the questions that got asked most throughout the research that we've done. So the question of, am I healthy? Everybody is wondering, because nobody talks about the fertility cycle at a level of depth. Socially, it's not something that comes up in conversation. So I have a cycle that's 35 days long, and it's not the typical what I heard is normal, which is 28 days. Does that mean that I'm not healthy? Actually, that's well within the healthy range, such as is 21 days. So these questions are very easy to answer with the appropriate amount of information. Fundamentally, one of the most fundamental questions is, what is the rhythm of a cycle? What is my cycle doing on a basis of 2 weeks in? What can I count on happening next? You have to imagine, though, I know the crowd here is mostly men. Imagine that you're going through, every calendar month, and something happens every calendar month, and you're really trying to figure out where it happens, and you want to predict it better. And you want to understand where it happens so that you can live your life and you can plan your life around it better. The most obvious example is around the period. So when does bleeding occur, and making sure that you're prepared and having that appropriate supplies packed for the day. But also, when do cramps happen? When might I have a migraine headache? And understanding when and what could actually trigger those things, and that's some of the multi-factor thing that you can only do, with multi-factor analysis that you can only do when you're tracking a lot of information, apply it to big data, do an analysis, and then give somebody predictions based off of those. The two questions that are the most emotional for somebody who are in their fertile years are, can I get pregnant today? If I'm trying to get pregnant, I want to know if today is the day for that. And maybe even more emotional and more applicable to a greater population of women are, can I please not get pregnant today? And knowing that information. One of the things that isn't known by many people is that it's only possible to get pregnant if you ovulate once in a cycle. It's only possible to get pregnant for about 6 to 4 days out of that whole cycle. And so knowing when those days are is incredibly empowering and valuable for a woman. This quote I'm just going to let you read. It's when people have access to this information, it can create a profound emotional impact on themselves, their understanding of themselves, and then how they can live their life. So the story, I like the thinking about it in terms of story. The story that somebody's learning about when they're using Clue is, what is the story of my cycle? How does it start? What is the meaning? Where are the peaks and the crescendos and the emotional aspects, and then when it ends? And this story repeats for about 30 years for a woman, up until the end of the cycles at menopause. And so it's a story that's important to get to know, and Clue helps with that. So now I'm going to switch over and actually show you Clue, which takes a little bit of setup, so I'll ask you to bear with me a bit. Okay. So this is Clue. And what you're seeing here is the representation of one cycle. It's the cycle that the user is currently in. So by grabbing this green knob and scrolling it around, you can go back into the past of the cycle and see the predictions in the center wheel there for what's coming up next and what happened. The little squares that you see are data points that have been entered. The green ones are about emotion, the purple ones are about pain, and also the different aspects, well, I shall show a little bit later. This is the fertile window. So this, based on the numbers and the statistics of this particular user's cycle, this is when she can and cannot get pregnant. And then going into the future, and we're surprisingly still the only tracking app that gives an indication of when PMS is coming. So this, how somebody uses Clue is that they tap on the center circle, enter today's data, and they're brought to the calendar. Here they can see the data that they've entered in the past, and with one touch of the button they can enter period data, pain if they've been having cramps, if they had sex on that day, moods, and then they're done. One of the key aspects of getting Clue to be highly used, and it is a very highly used, what's called our conversion rate from people who download and then continue to use the app, is extremely high, kind of unheard of within the category. And it's because we make it very easy to use. So somebody can launch Clue, enter their data, and be done with it in about 10 seconds, which makes it a very easy, healthy habit for people to pick up. So I also wanted to go over the emotional aspect of the design, which is, we really tried to, the iconography was designed with women, in collaboration with women, to have a level of empathy with the feelings and to create some empathetic sense of humor. And so it's generally when people are using Clue, they express how it's just fun to use, which is good because a lot of the stuff that they're entering into Clue is not always fun, especially in the pain category. So here we have cramps, headache, ovulation pain, and then also tender breasts. You'll see that in the sex category, the sex is indicated by a reclining man, kind of leaning back in a sexy position there. And if he's, for protected sex, wearing a condom, he's got a tie on there. And then for withdrawal, we have a towel for cleaning up afterwards. So these icons, and I'm glad people are laughing, it's supposed to be funny. And actually when the app gets used for the first time and I'm watching somebody use it for the first time, they start to smile and sometimes they laugh and they show it to their friend. And this is exactly the type of emotional engagement that we're looking for. So importantly, then being able to get into the history, what people are really looking for then to understand what's going on with their cycle, they can see and look back over their history, how their cycle changes over time and how the rhythm of it changes. So it's very normal for a healthy cycle to change in response to environmental stresses. And it gets longer or a little bit shorter. Generally, it gets longer. And then that can be actually seen there. And they can see maybe, tapping into that cycle, here's the long one, maybe what was going on in that cycle to have caused that. And maybe in this case, it was, for example, like jet lag. If you are a cycle nerd, as we all are at Clue, you can actually dig into your statistics here. And you can get all the way down to the statistical means and the standard deviations. So if you have questions about that, you can actually dig into all that level of detail. Also, I wanted to point out what we have in here, the questions about what is happening today. It's a fundamental question of not knowing anymore, being taught when I was a kid about the fertility cycle, but not having access to that information anymore. So inside of Clue, there's an incredible amount of information that can be read about what's going on in the body physiologically. This is textbook style of information that's been made much easier to understand and more in common language. And at the bottom, which you guys might appreciate, everything is cited. Every claim that we make, it has a citation, and it can be accessed, all of it peer-reviewed. So the text is originally written by me, then it goes through an editorial board, and it's approved by a team of OBGYN, medical researchers, clinicians, all of that. So it's very solid information. All of this in an extremely friendly, engaging to use app. So with all these happy and fun colors. So that's the end of the demo. We can shut that off. So this is our competition. And I'm bringing this up. Yeah, I'm bringing this up because the design, this is when people start using Clue, most of the time when we get a lot of support tickets where people are just saying, thank you for not treating me like a child. Because period trackers right now look like this. Cycle trackers, generally almost 100% of them, this is what they look like. You know, the joke that somebody wrote in after we launched was that it really looks like something that My Little Pony would use. And Clue has definitely tried to take a more sophisticated approach because, again, our goal was to not just reach the young women, but also be able to span the entire range all the way up with contemporary design, all the way through an entire, across generations of people within all these different life stages. And we are succeeding with that. So this design style approach that we've taken has been successful. Also wanted to mention that the approach that we take to design is a science-based approach because we are integrating science into Clue. And it's basically a science product that's made science where science and design come together, life science and design. So we take the scientific approach. So we're asking questions, developing hypotheses. We test for scientific and user validity. So user desirability, is it producing a result that they're interested in? Is it answering a need that they have? Then we analyze the data, draw conclusions. We find out if it's actually working, and then we decide whether or not to release the new feature or not. Some features that we create don't get out into market because they haven't satisfied some of these criteria. So one thing that we don't do is, after talking to some people here, that we probably could be doing better is talking about the things that we choose not to release. For example, we choose not to integrate moon cycles into Clue because scientific evidence, and there are research papers out there, indicates that there is not a statistically significant amount of correlation between the fertility cycle and the lunar cycle. It's a question that gets asked quite a bit, and then there are a lot of other myths also that we could be bringing out into the light a little bit better. This is what our lab looks like. So when we're doing testing, we're creating behavioral research or doing behavioral tests. So we're putting things in front of users that are meant to gain insight into their behavior, their perception, and then we use those insights in order to create the design. So trying to demystify the process of design a little bit. It's a highly iterative approach. It's based on evidence. It's based on insights. One thing I wanted to mention too, before I get into just finishing off here, Clue delivers value to its users, a lot of value. So if someone can know 3 days from now what will be happening with their body and they can be prepared for that, that's an incredibly powerful piece of information, and we provide that for all of our users. And that is the reason that people want to give us their data. So they put data into Clue so that they can get these insights. So when people are talking about big data and trying to extract it, to try to pull it from people, I would encourage you instead to try to think about it in terms of what can you be giving to them that makes sense out of their data, so that you can actually, they have a reason to be giving you their data. We don't collect any data that we don't need. So if we can't provide any value from the data, we don't collect it. We also don't collect the data, period. All of the data that we create stays on the phone. If you delete the app off of your phone, the data is gone too. So we don't have a backend, we don't do backups for people. That is something that has become a problem recently because now that Clue has been out in the market for over a year, we have some issues with data loss, and people are like, are you kidding? You don't allow backup, or you don't have to provide a backup. And so that is something now that we're getting into. But again, that's based on the user requiring it of us, not the fact that we are trying to push something onto them. Our vision is to take this data and anonymous, secure, private data and create some relatively radical innovations to advance female health. What we believe that we can do is predict with exact precision the days that someone can or will not get pregnant. So we plan to have Clue be used as effectively as a birth control pill or a condom, and have it be scientifically valid and sound. And this is not a stretch. This is coming up. And also predict which exact days these cyclic symptoms will come up, because this is very empowering information for somebody to have. We are also getting into more quantitative data very soon, automated data entry, and also sensor integration. We've heard a lot about that, so I pulled all those slides out of my deck. So there's a lot coming up. So stress levels, activity levels, blood pressure, all of the weight, all of these things can have an impact on the cycle. So imagine how we can actually make that prediction of when the next cycle is beginning, when the next period is happening, when some of these symptoms are arising based on multi-factor analysis. And then in the future, we are planning to run clinical trials to reach scientific validity. So just ending there, wanted to thank you for your time and hope that I've been able to convey some of the importance of design in healthcare. Thanks.